I'm Bob Lang, Executive Editor of Popular Woodworking magazine. This is the object of what we're doing here, and this is the stool that I made for Woodworking magazine. It's actually on the cover of the final issue, and it's really one of my favorite pieces, and for several reasons. One, there's a puzzle of how it goes together. And so part of building this is how do we figure out how to make the parts, because there isn't anything square to measure from. So everything is based off of a center line. If we hung a plumb bob from the middle of the seat, then we can measure out to the legs, we can measure out to here, we can get a good handle on where everything is. The other thing I like about this is, while it may not be a cure for perfectionism, it's certainly good therapy for it, because it won't go together if all of the joints are perfect. And this is one from a leftover from a class I taught a couple years ago, and that's just loosely fit together, but it's an incredibly strong structure. And anybody in here an engineer? Sort of, okay. Triangles are great structures for strength because they can't rack. If you got a rectangle, it can go to a parallelogram, but a triangle can't. So because of that triangulation, it's an incredibly strong thing. You know, I think you could probably jack up a truck and rest it on these. So what we're going to need is everybody gets a seat, 3 stretchers, and 3 legs. I also have a pile of lumber crayons, because the error I made with one of these is you can see the tenons in these stretchers have to twist a little bit. And so I zigged when I should have zagged, flipped this over before I cut the tenons, went to put the stool together, and it just wouldn't go. And so I would strongly suggest that you mark the parts where they go together, just to keep it straight. And so I like a crayon for that, because it's a big, bold mark and hard to get confused. So let's pass some stuff out. These are quick drawings, and we're going to start with this on a hunk of plywood. We're going to make a full-size layout drawing, and that is going to give us points that we can find and measure to and figure out just what size things are. So anyway, if we think about this imaginary plumb line through the center and can establish that line, that over to the leg, and the leg is going to make a triangle. So these squares are roughly 20 by 20. They are a wee bit short, but the first thing I want to do is establish this center line. And that is going to let me establish where the legs are. Now, from the bottom of the center line, if we come over 8 3/8 and get a mark, that is the distance from the center line to the inside corner of a leg. Up at the top, from the center to the inside mortise of the leg is 3 inches. So I'm going to come over. So if I get those 2 points and connect them with a line, this line is going to represent the back of a leg. And so now I can establish all my other points. The inside of the leg. Yeah. Yeah. Now, I can set my bevel gauge to this angle, and as fate would have it, and by sheer coincidence, this is 15 degrees. Now I'll mention degrees a couple of times, but throughout this project, setting the angle directly from your layout and transferring it to your parts is a much better way to go. So that is the angle of my leg. If I come down the thickness of the top piece, which should be 1.25 inches more or less, and I'm just laying that piece on there, marking it off. Now I've got something that when I lay out the seat, I can set the angles for those mortises going through. If I take this as a radius and draw a circle, these legs, the inside of the legs, is going to land on that circle. And so that is also 8 3/8 from the center line. Let me come up. It isn't critical that I start in the middle this way. It looks a little neater. Again, I can just set the radius. Whoops. Let me get the big compass. And I can set the radius from the center line to the inside edge of the leg. And then I'm going to draw a circle for that. Now the next issue we have is, if we're looking at the top, these 3 legs are arrayed around the circle. If I want to divide this circle up, the radius that I use to draw the circle, if I step off around the edges, that makes it into 6 equal parts. And so if I go every other one, that gives me the locations where these guys are going to land. So I will just arbitrarily, we'll say this is a leg, this is a leg, and that's a leg. So later on, when we get to making the real thing, I have these points that I can line up to. And so if I now come out from the center to those marks, I've got the triangular arrangement of the legs set. The other circle I want to draw is going to be a 13/16 radius. What this is going to be is the center of the stretchers makes an equilateral triangle. And so we've got 1.5 inches on each leg of this. And that works out that if I set this on here, I'll just barely be able to see the points of this triangle hitting on that circle. What happens and where it gets tricky, and this is down the road a ways, but we're going to make these stretchers and get them together. And so we're going to line that up, and then we can place 3 legs in the seat on top of that and hopefully get those lined up. That'll give us the angles that we need for where the mortises twist. The problem is going to be where this hits. So we're going to have to project that up, which is going to give us another circle to draw. And this is based on the height of the stretchers from the ground. And that, I believe, that is 6 7/8. So if I mark off on the side here, coming up from the bottom 6 7/8, come in from there, and this point right here now becomes the location of these mortises on the leg. And so I'll be able to,
Top of it or the bottom of it?
that's going to be the bottom. And then these stretchers are 1 inch thick, so I'll come up another inch. And that intersection, that's going to be important later on. So I can now take the line from the bottom, if that compass is big enough. And I can either draw a full circle or just the arcs where they cross the 3 lines I made that are going to locate the legs. Now, what I like about this is there are no numbers involved. I am not that good with numbers, and it's real easy to transpose a number or forget a number. But this, I know it's this distance. So now when we get to laying out these stretchers, I will know that that line is the bottom of the angle. This line coming up square is going to be the top of the angle. And we'll get back to all of this, and hopefully it'll make sense then. But that is going to give us the compound angle for where that tenon twists at the end. Does everybody realize how that's going to work? The other interesting thing about these is, and it's what we ran into when we were taking apart the original one, is these aren't that easy to take apart. And so all these joints kind of have to work together. So on this assembly, this first 3 joints are the easy part. Where it gets totally weird is at the end that this makes this twist. And so we have to have this assembly to figure out where these parts go. And then we have to have the legs in. Pointed the right way, hopefully. Hate when that happens. And this is all kind of loose, and you can see it's real kind of sloppy and floppy, but when it's all assembled, and then we'll wedge the joints from outside, it all gets rigid and strong and pretty stable. So what we'll end up doing is setting these on our marks, setting this assembly on top, but these joints are way in here, so we're going to have to project up from this drawing with a square to locate those. So that's the reason we're doing this, and I hope that's making sense. Yeah, we're drawing like a plan and a section,
Okay.
and we're laying them on top of each other
I think that's
just for convenience.
I think that's what's confusing to me is that they're both together.
What those two circles are going to be
Those are going to be
is
done.
where this hits
Right.
and where that hits.
Okay.
Yeah. And that will be handy later on when we go to put the mortises in the seat. So this outer circle is the distance down here at the bottom from there to there. So go ahead and draw that circle. Bottom of the stretcher,
Okay, I've got that one and the top of the stretcher.
right. And that's where these guys come in.
Okay.
Yeah, whatever that radius is,
Okay. Is how you get the leg positions. Okay.
yeah, that will
bring around to the 6.
that will divide that up.
Okay. All right. And then how do you get this length?
That is the distance from the center
To that
to where
crossing.
That's 6 7/8, that's 7 7/8. So when I layer in,
Oh, no, missed a step.
See? I knew it wasn't gonna be that.
You need a line coming over square
That's where the line is.
okay,
that intersects the leg.
and
So then he has
And
to
then
set
the-
to that
then the
radius.
From the
radius.
center to there, from the center to there,
got it.
and it doesn't hurt to leave yourself a note, this is the inside of the legs. What these two inner circles are is when this is up in space, the bottom of this piece is going to be on that line,
Okay,
and the top of it is going to be on that one.
on the other side.
Just for clarification, the marks we made, the bigger circle is the inner face of the leg. That first circle out ought to be where the bottom of that mortise hits, bottom of that tenon hits, and the inner circle should be where the top hits. When you decide to cut these, you've got this down here to line them up on,
Right.
but they're going to end up here.
Up there.
So you have to make a leap of faith
when you elevate that
when you decide to
plane,
cut it. The other part of the drawing is where the mortises go in the seat, and we'll get to that a little bit. So what we probably should do is start actually making something. That a lot of classes teach you how to avoid real work, and we've succeeded in killing a good hour here. So let's get going on making this joint at the center. One of the things that I like about this project is you have to figure out what's important and what isn't. And also where to start. Basically, we have to make two sub-assemblies. One is this, which is the three stretchers here, And then we'll fit the 3 legs to the top. And so once we have those 2 sub-assemblies, we'll bring them back to this layout board. We'll set one on top of the other. We'll make our marks and we'll cut and it'll be fine. To get there though, we need to start somewhere. So with all of the joinery in this, the fit in the thickness of the tenons is, you want to be pretty close. The ends, you want to leave some room, because if you don't, you won't be able to get it back apart. And I find it interesting that when they're all together and in position, it's really tight, and then you get to a part where it starts to wiggle and then it falls apart. So what we want to do first is make these tenons. Now, conveniently, those are 30 degrees. And because we are nice guys, we cut one end of these at the right angle, not a right angle, the correct angle. My 8th grade math teacher his ghost came and got me. So if we set our bevel gauge to that angle, we can now mark out the rest of the joints. And you know, in most of the time in woodworking, we're dealing with squares, so angles get a little weird and funky. We could cut these at the table saw. You know, I could set the miter gauge and I could pass that over the blade and I'd be fine. It gets weird on this because if I flip it over to cut the other side, that's no longer what I want to do. So to do this with the miter gauge on the table saw or at the chop saw or radial arm saw, I've got to make 2 setups at just the right angle in opposite directions. Doing it with hand tools, however, it's a little easier because I can just mark the lines and cut the lines. When these go together, we want to leave the tenon sticking out a little bit, and then we'll trim it up flush after it's assembled. So I want to come back, and I think I came back 1.25 inches. So if I get my little square set to 1.25 inches or thereabouts, this distance isn't important. It just needs to be long enough to go all the way through. So I can come back that far, mark the angle, take the square, and a lot of people struggle with this. I think it's easier, set the pencil on the line and then slide the square up to it, as opposed to trying to get the square just right. There's a little bit of an offset from the pencil to the edge of the bevel. And if I want to do this with a knife instead of a pencil, it's a little easier to get the saw started. Now I want to do 3 of these. So if I'm thinking efficiently, I can line up the ends get a square long enough, and I really only have to measure once because now I've got that distance on all of them. It does make sense to mark them all. If I go with the knife, it's the same deal. And it's actually easier with the knife. I can feel when the knife point is in that notch I made and come back across the other way. Now normally I will cut mortises first and then the tenons. For this project, however, because angled tenons are a little different, if I mess up the shoulder cut and have to redo it, then I'm going to lose the distance from the tenon to the mortise. So this allows me to have 3 or 4 shots, or however many we need. Glenn would get it right the first time, but I'm going to give myself a little insurance. So rather than doing one at a time, I think it's easier just to go ahead and do the layout work on all 3. Now I don't want to get the mortise location in until I've got the tenon cut. So that gets them for the shoulder cuts. So in addition to cutting around the perimeter, I'm also going to have to cut it at a 90-degree angle to that. And we'll get this last one done. Okay. So now I want that tenon to be 3/8 of an inch thick when I'm done. In theory, this is an inch thick. So 3/8 minus an inch minus 3/8 is going to be 5/8. Divide that by 2, it's 5/16. And if I come in 5/16 from each edge, that should give me 3/8 in the middle. Now on this, we're going to cut the mortises by drilling them out at the drill press and then shaving the edges with a chisel and rasps and stuff. These are liable to get a little bit wider than we intend. So therefore I want to cut these a little bit fatter. And what I'm trying to do here is zero in on my distance. So I set my square for 5/16, and I want to double check and see how far apart those marks are. And so I can get the end and that line inside the 2 pencil lines. That's where I want to be. Now I'm going to go ahead and set my gauge to that line. And I want to be just outside of it. So now I can go around, and because I have the gauge set, it doesn't take long to put these cut lines in. Now, because these are cut, it's actually that little bit of an edge, just like my knife could find it. It's going to be easier for the saw to find it, the chisel to find it. The problem is I'm a little old and have trouble seeing, so I can go ahead and darken up those with the pencil. And the pencil will also get within those lines. And that is just to make it easier to see. I'm actually doing that for the benefit of the camera. It's not that I can't see them, the camera can't see them. Now the whole idea of this is to not take forever to do it. So I want to be careful, but I don't want to mess around all day getting these lines in. And it's kind of like a assembly line of a sort. So I'm doing one task 3 times, just you get a repetition and a rhythm going. Well, now that we got our tenons marked out, we can go ahead and cut them. And doing this by hand really isn't that slow or that difficult. If I'm cutting to a line, does it really matter if the line is square or if the line's at an angle? It really doesn't make much difference. And when the tenon is done, what's going to be important is that these edges all line up with each other. So if I'm not perfect right off the saw, that's really okay. It's cool if I hit it. If not, I've got an escape route. One thing about sawing by hand is getting the saw started and also getting my body out of the way. So if I'm coming square, I want to be able to move my arm in a straight line. So doing the angle, I got to get a little different stance. And if people are watching me and making me nervous, it can be hard to start. The last thing I did with a lot of angles, somebody offered me a miter box, and I turned it down because I don't want to be fooling with the miter box going back and forth. So really getting started is making a push, and I like to get as long a cut as I can going. If I see somebody trying to nibble with the saw, I think, why don't you have a saw that's that long? Because once I'm off to a good start, the rest of it should be pretty easy. It's that initial cut, and it's stopping before I go too far. One of the problems with this is I don't have mortises cut yet, so I can't really check and see how good I'm doing. So I advised you guys laying them out to lay them out a little bit fat. And then some smart aleck in the crowd said, "What exactly do you mean by that? How far is a little bit fat?" And this is something your experience and your judgment is going to tell you. And I had a thought there but lost it completely, so I'll just keep cutting. And again, I'm trying to do the same thing 3 times in a row. I think it's easier, you get like a rhythm as you're working. So I got all 6 of my shoulders cut, and now I want to come the other way. And I'm going to switch to a rip saw, which isn't really that important. If you only have one saw, use that and learn to get good at it, and then you'll know if you really need a different. So I want to see both lines. So once I've gone, more than a couple strokes, I'm pretty well committed to where that's going to go. Hopefully it's not too ugly on that end. And again, I've practiced cutting on both sides, just so I'm not spending a lot of time flipping back and forth. From here, I've already got the kerf, and I'll see just how far off I was. This one's a little wacky back in here. So I'm trying to correct that on this other line. So it's a little harder than it ought to be. There we go. So that's the tenon. Now, there's an alternative right over there called the bandsaw, which I wouldn't hesitate to use. So I get the short side pointing up so I can see that. I could do it this way as well, but then I can't judge where to stop the cut. On the bandsaw, if you plant your left hand, and then you can use that as a fence, and it's actually quite possible to make a pretty decent cut. Now, if this were square, that would fall off at that point. So it's still not cut by that distance of the angle, but that's really okay. Because I should be able just to get a chisel in there and bust it off. And it's leaving, I've removed enough wood that it's going to break, hopefully predictably, close to my line, and then I can come back with the chisel and pare that off. Now, one of the things of working with a chisel is you don't want to stick the chisel in your hand. It hurts, it makes a mess, you'll have to go to the emergency room, you'll miss lunch. So I've got it in the bench hook and I got my left hand way out of the way. And I've got the flat part that the saw made, and if I rest the back of the chisel on that, I can pare down in there. So I want to check how close I am, and it's really a lot easier if I have the mortise, so I'm not going to go too crazy with it. But I've got a couple ways I can check. And so with my adjustable square, I can set that to my distance, or it may already be set if I marked them, and I can look and see if that's really, what I'm looking at is the end of the rule and the surface of the tenon, and I'm looking for big gaps and humps in there or big variations in distance. So on this side, I can feel it kind of rubbing on that end, and this one I can't. And you can also see I'm off the line a little bit there. So I can go ahead and trim that up a little bit. I don't really want to go nuts at this point until I've got the mortises to fit them into. I also want to look at the shoulder lines and see what kind of shape they're in. If we have light, I can hold that up to the light, and if I'm seeing a gap in there, I know how far off I am. Let me hold the square one up. There we go. And again, I'll adjust this once we get the mortises cut. But that's about all I know about tenons.
Can I say my favorite thing to him?
Huh?
My favorite thing to say, you paid for the whole blade, use it. Sorry.
Yeah. Get the 3D stuff going. Yeah. Okay, so next step is the mortises. And we do have these sheets. What's important is that they go different directions. And what becomes important is keeping track of which goes with which and which end is up. Because the fatal error I made originally was from turning something upside down. So I would go ahead and, take the crayon and just make a mark so you know that the colored mark is going to be up. So if we're looking at it, you can see the angle on the tenon is this way, the angle on the mortise is that way. This distance from here to here should be 1.5 inches. And again, like I did with the other pieces, I can line these up, and I'm going to line the shoulders up because that's the important part here is the shoulders. Doesn't really matter what these lengths are because those are going through the legs. We're going to trim them off. So if those are lined up, then I can come back 1.5 inches. And I can square all the way across. So this is one end of the mortise. The other end is actually going to be the thickness of this tenon plus somewhere between 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch. Because we want to be able to slide these back and forth when we assemble it. Now the reason for marking this on the side is I'm going to go over to the drill press and hog out the middle of the mortise and then clean it up with a chisel. I want to make sure that I'm going the right way with the drill bit, because if I go the wrong way, it'll be embarrassing and we'll have to get new legs. So that's why we got some extra legs. It's a little extra step. It should pay off. Now the other thing that I may have done is these are 7/8 wide and 1 inch thick. And so I got it right. That's a good thing. So again, I could keep transferring from one mark to another rather than measuring 2 or 3 or 4 times. And so the mortise is going to be the same distance as the tenon is. And actually I could use the same gauge setting. It's a little bit nicer to change the cutting gauge if you have one, so that when you're laying out the mortise, the angled part of the cutter is going into the waste area. I don't really think that's necessary, but it doesn't hurt. The other thing that the cutting gauge does is it's actually making a finished cut at the very beginning. So from here on in, I want to be preserving these lines. And as long as I don't destroy that cut edge, I can nibble my way to it however way I want to do it. And again, I want to make sure that I've got about 3/8 in between. So I am a 64th over, more or less. When I've got these marked, I'll go over to the drill press and we're set up there. This jig is going to hold the piece at the angle, and this is why I marked the sides, because if it's going that way, it is wrong, wrong, wrong. I also have this set up so in theory, this is going to be centered. To check my jig, I'm going to come down here on the waist end and what I'm looking for is for those center holes to match up. And so now I'm just going to drill all the way through, and because of how I set up the jig, if I need to put it back on the machine, I can just drop the drill bit into the hole in the jig and clamp it down from there, and so it's repeatable. And now it's just a matter of punching the holes in. And because I want to be a little big to begin with, it's not going to make a tremendous difference if I'm on the line or not. If I'm a little over, it doesn't matter. And there's a tendency here for it to slide downhill. So I'm getting each end, and then I'll just come in and get the middle. And now I'll just take a chisel and clean back to the edges of the holes. If I want to make a couple more passes, get that closer to being a straight line, that might make it easier. With a harder wood, I would probably go ahead and do that. But this will make things much easier when it comes to the chisel work, because it's establishing things at the correct angle and in the right direction. The big idea with drilling it is that I can take the chisel and just pare away what's left. So that is relatively easy to do. I can just come in and shave off the sides work back to my line. If I want to do the whole thing by hand, I can use a chisel all the way. Now, a mortise chisel is preferable but not necessary. And really, there's two things going on. One is removing the waste. The other is getting the angle right. Now, in this case, because these mortises want to be a little sloppy end to end, it isn't critical that that angle be exactly at the 30 degrees. So if I get the chisel in the lines there, and I'm just starting in the middle and working towards the ends. And it does, there's a tendency for the workpiece to scoot. You can't see it from over there, but the other reason for having my lines on the sides is I can use that to aim the chisel. And most of this, it doesn't make much difference. If this were a different circumstance and the angle was critical, it's still really only critical at the very ends. So what I'm doing is just going as deep as I can, cutting down, and the action of the chisel is forcing the hunk of wood out, and it will break off pretty easy. One end of this is going like this, the other end is going like that. So this is the easier cut to make because I'm going more downhill into it. So on this, I want to get about halfway through. And as I come down, then I can pop the junk out. Now, a regular chisel, if it were the right width, will also work. Because it isn't as beefy and isn't designed for this specialty, it's just going to take a little longer. I can't get as deep. I can't make as good a cuts. So when I'm about halfway through, I'll flip it over. And anytime you do a through mortise, no matter how you cut it, you're better off working from both sides. And that way you're not breaking out the exit side. So you can see with the mortise chisel, it isn't that bad. The tool has kind of evolved to do this task. I'm not having to really wallop on it because it's heavy enough. Now when I get to this end, I'm flipping it around.
It's a little south of Montana.
And this is actually similar to what I was trying to accomplish at the drill press. I've got a whole bunch of junk in the middle that I want to get out of my way. And then when that's out of my way, I'll make the sides and the ends nice. The other thing to avoid doing is levering right on the shoulder if that's already cut. And so you can see I've stayed a fair distance away from my lines, just so if I do start levering on that, I'm not bunging up my finished edge. And so again, working downhill is easier. So now that I've got the junk out, I can come in closer to the edge. And again, now I want to check my aim. I want to check my aim with the lines that are back here. Just go through that. Notice I went end for end. And a lot of this you can tell how you're doing by the sound of things, that it makes a different noise once you've excavated all the way through. Now this doesn't look as pretty as if I'd cut it with a router, or if I'd cut it with a hollow chisel. So I may need to come in and pare down the sides. On the paring of this, I think it's pretty easy to do vertically. I think we have kind of an innate sense of when things are plumb. And this doesn't require a lot of pressure. I'm really just kind of leaning on it and letting the weight of the chisel make those cuts. So now at this point, I'm almost ready to check the fit. And I'm probably not wide enough. But I can take one of my tenons and start to see how close I am. So actually, I can put a corner in and see that my fit up and down is okay, or pretty close, at least close enough to get it in. It's the length on this side where I need to make it a little wider. And I ought to be able to should be able to come in and just pair with the chisel on the end. And so part of this is keeping my shoulder on top of the chisel And then I can just shift my body weight so I'm not really forcing that in with an arm movement. I'm making it move by shifting my weight. And so there is one that's entirely chopped. And I'm really happy that worked. Now, it's still not perfect. There's a little bit of adjustments, but I'm in the neighborhood. And I'm going to go ahead and mark which one goes with which one. Again, if I get a good fit off the chisel, good for me. If I don't, I can use different tools and remove stuff in finer increments, if you will. So there's the paired version. And again, I will see how my fit is going. So I like to check and see if I've got my thickness close by sticking a corner in. And this is enough to get started, but not enough to go all the way in. So I know I don't want to go crazy removing stuff. Again, I'm pretty good right there. This could probably be beaten into place, but I want to make it just a little easier to go in. So I will resort to a float. And so this is like a really thick saw, if you imagine a tooth configuration there. And on the tenon, it's pretty easy to hold it flat and it'll stay flat. I could also do this with the chisel. I could do this with a shoulder plane. The other advantage of this is it's a good 90-degree corner here. And so I can clean up the shoulder that way. Because there's no teeth on this edge, it's safe to do that. If I were doing this with a rasp, I'd have the same problem with the chisel. It could cut in that way. And I need to find a narrower one. Now I could get inside the mortise, and this is a little different style, but it's the same purpose. And I'm just letting gravity keep it flat, and I don't have to use a lot of effort to clean up those edges. Now I'm almost there. The problem I have is I want to wedge this at the end, and I need a little more width. On these, the distance from this shoulder to this part of the mortise is what I want to maintain. So to make this wider, I'm going to work on the outside of it. And I will just come back with a chisel. So I want to make this hole longer. To keep my orientation of the chisel, I'm going to lay the flat back of it on what's already there and then swing it in a little bit. And that maintains a straight line coming off the edge of the mortise. And now I've got some definite points to stick the end of the chisel in. And I'm taking a fairly big bite here, so I'll resort to the mallet.
My first hand-cut mortise has
you
to
get
have
to do
somebody
it on
watching
camera, right?
me, filming me do my very first. It's a little disconcerting.
Well, the good news is that, 2/3 of what we shoot ends up on the floor. So.
Well, that's true.
Little B-roll.
There are like stages to getting these things to fit together. And what is really tricky about this is keeping track of the parts, which one's going with which one. It's incredibly easy to get them mixed up and fit the same skinny tenon in all two other mortises. In addition to that, you have to get each joint to fit good one at a time and then get all three together. So it's kind of like being a doctor and diagnosing what is wrong. And there are just a zillion things that can go wrong with these. Mostly it'll be related to the tenon being twisted or beveled, skinny on one end. And you can actually tell by how it fits together. So if these are going in different directions, then I can look at it and say, okay, it's probably the inside of this mortise needs some work to get that to fit better. And most of this class is getting a tenon to fit in a mortise, because we're doing that 9 times and we're done. Some of the things I do is you get it together and it looks pretty good on this side, and then over on the other side I have a gap. Now my brain tells me the problem's on the side with the gap, but it really isn't. It's the side that fits tight. And as we go through, when we were first making stuff, we're kind of chopping away and digging stuff out with the drill press. The closer you get, you kind of want to get finer and finer instruments to trim things down that move a little slower. A shoulder plane is not going to produce big fluffy shavings, but the tool itself will be a real help to tell you how you're going. Because the side and the bottom are square, if I'm laying that on the tenon and the shoulder is square, I won't see a gap in there. If it's back a little bit, if the shoulder's angled this way, I'll see a gap up at the top. If it's angled that way, I'll see a gap down in on my side of it. Probably the worst thing you can do is just randomly start trimming something off and hoping it's going to fit. After we get, so I told you this was the hard part. After we get each of the three looking pretty good, it's time to get all three together. And at this point, you'll probably discover that they were fit too tight. Now, to get them all to go, you need to get each one to start, and this is where you need that little extra width in there. And they might slide together. If not, you can tap them like that. And this is probably the best part of this class. Now, the other thing that happens is, even though I may have had them all fitting individually, all three I'm going to have some gaps, and the shoulder here can be keeping this apart down there. So I tend to go around, I like to go around, I prefer to go around. I'm going to give you 18 chances to edit this. I will go around, and again, I've got a nice, well, a not too bad fit here, and a big honking gap on the other side. With these, I can take the pencil and kind of trace over where it's tight, and that will give me a line to work back to. Again, if I look at them from the end, I can see if I've got a raggedy side that something might be hanging down, holding other stuff apart. And don't worry if they get a little sloppy, as long as you can get them all together, because when we wedge them together at the end, that will tighten back up nicely. Yeah, see now at the ends,
That gives me the play to,
we're going to drive wedges into those to tighten
it's gonna get
everything
filled
up.
up anyhow.
Yeah.
Good.
So the only thing I would worry about would be on these lines,
Right.
and you got good lines there.
Good.
Those look good.
Good.
So
Still got, I've got to do the gross work on this third one.
yeah, you're in great shape.
Good.
And yours is actually fitting better than mine. That there's a lot of, when you force the legs together into the seat, that puts pressure all three ways.
This way, or it sort of racks them this way as well?
No, it like brings them all in at once, like if you put a band clamp around them. What we got to do is fit three legs into the seat. And we're not going to worry about making the seat round just yet, because there's a lot of opportunities to screw it up that would make that a waste of time. What we need to find is the location for the mortises in the seat. So this time we're going to do the mortises first. And if anybody's been wondering what the heck this little drawing is, this is the layout on the seats. The first thing we have to do is find the center. And the easiest way is to go from corner to corner. There are also a number of different ways we could do this. What we have to do is find the same center at the top and bottom. And we can also take an adjustable square, come in from each corner this way. So I'll go ahead and I'll mark my center point on the bottom. because these mortises, when they come through, they are arrayed around a circle. They're also tilted at an angle. And we will go ahead and, this is the better looking side. I'll call that the top. We've got a 3-inch circle and a 4-inch circle. So the 3 inches is to the inside of the mortise for the legs, and then the 4 inches is to the outside of those mortises. So there is 3. And the reason I'm doing this between two numbers is I can stick the pointed end of the compass in the engraved line on the ruler. And that's going to be a little more accurate than trying to balance it on the end of the ruler. Now, I want to do the same thing we did on the big layout, divide this into 3 equal portions. I also want to worry about which direction this mortise is in the grain of the wood. I think it's better to line that up with the grain. And the reasoning for that is that we're going to be wedging it in this way, it'll be less likely to split apart. So I can get a center line going with the grain. So one mortise is going to be in here. So then I can step around again to find the other 2 locations. So now coming out from the center, this is going to be the center of a mortise. How many times can I break the pencil? And this will be the center of the mortise, along with this. Now these are going to be a 1/2 inch wide, and so I want to mark a 1/4 of an inch from each side of that center line I just made. And then I'll just connect the dots. And this is going to be a guide when I'm chiseling and cutting. When we're going to do this, we're going to drill these out on the drill press in a similar way that we did the other ones. And I'm going to want to line up the center line for the drilling. Now, in theory, this end is a real slight arc, and I'm going to want that to be a straight line. And this probably isn't necessary, but there is a significant portion of people in this class who that would bother. So just so you guys can sleep at night. So this is the top of my mortises, and I got one more to go. The problem is we need to drill from the bottom instead of the top. That doesn't mean this is a waste of time. I'm going to need these layout lines to chisel and fit and get everything just right. But what I have to do is transfer these mortise locations from the top to the bottom. If we go back to this layout, remember that we set the top on here to get the thickness. This line is our 3 inches for the back of the mortises. So down here is going to be the edge of the back of the mortise on the bottom. That makes sense? The inside edge. Yeah. You and I need to work on inside versus back. Okay. Yeah. This point here is going to be the inside edge of the mortise on the bottom of the seat. So what I need is to grab this distance. And instead of measuring, I'm just going to take my compass and set it right on that line. Because that's the distance I want. Who cares what the number is? It's this exact distance. So now I can draw that inner circle down on the bottom. And I need to make sure I get the right location. So I'll just square that line around. Does that make it easier to see? I feel like I'm hiding stuff back here and you can't see it. Okay, so this is the center line of a mortise coming this way. If I step around again, find my other points, now I can come out from center That's the center line of another mortise. This will be the center line of the other one. I want to come an inch out. So there I've got that. Again, I'm just going to set my compass to that point. So now I've got the outside of the mortises. And I just need to mark the edges. And that's 1/4 inch out each way. Now you might prefer to knife these lines in. I've cut myself once today, so I'm going to avoid sharp and pointy things. It'll make a little cleaner hole if you go ahead and knife it in. And should I mention that I'm lining up a mark on both sides of the line, and then 1/4 here, 1/4 there, 1/4 here, 1/4 there. It's just a faster way to lay that out. some people tend to fuss too much and repeat themselves. So, this is the bottom. There, and there are going to be the mortises, which are going to come out there, and there. I'm really drilling these at the same angle that the legs are. So they're going to come through like that. What I have to worry about is I want to make sure the bottom is up. The other thing that's kind of tricky here is I want the sides of the hole to stay parallel to my lines. And so if I get off this way, that's a bad thing. And I haven't, well, I thought about putting a center pin in here so I could get the holes just so, but then I'd need to keep moving the center pin because I got to drill 3 holes again. And again, this is the rough work with the shovel. We're not making a really perfect hole at this point. So if I can eyeball this line I drew with the bit and the column of the drill press behind it, that works pretty well. Now, I'm just going to hold on to this by hand, and I've got an open bottom on the jig so I can get in there and grip. If I have trouble gripping or if this is scary in any way, I can come in here with a couple of clamps and hold it. So I want to be close to the lines. It's not critical if I miss them a little bit. It's not the end of the world if I go past them some. I want to come up. So I just want to keep repeating that. Now these mortises they're going to get a little bit wider than 1/2 inch. That will be okay because we'll cut the tenons to match. So that's that part. From here on in, it's just like we were doing before. We're going to take our chisels and rasps and clean these mortises up, and then we'll be ready to tenon the legs. The 2 angled ones are kind of wacky because there aren't many situations where you're crossing the grain both ways. And so instead of one easy side and one difficult side, it's kind of difficult both ways. And again, this angle is more important back here than it is out here. So if I needed some sort of a guide, I've got the end of the leg. I could clamp it on, or I could set it nearby. I could set one of my bevel gauges, or I can just kind of eyeball, keep my eye on what's going on down in there. And what really is a little more difficult with this is just a matter of the thickness. I'm going a further distance to get through there. Now, as you look down in there, you can see a scallop where the drill bit was. So if you just pare that off, that gets it all down to the same level, and you're pretty sure that the angle will be pretty close. Again, I'm not going to go crazy at this point getting these perfect until I have the tenons to fit them into. That will tell me more. Now, when I go to do the tenons, while we're all collectively gathered here, my leg is going to go like that, and my tenon, there's no shoulder on the inside edge or the back edge. So there is going to be the front of the tenon where that circle passes through. My shoulder of the tenon, let me do it back here, is the thickness of the top plus a little bit. So I'll just go ahead and set that distance, and then when I set the legs up, I could come off about 1/8 of an inch or so. And I just want to go past the surface of the top. Again, we're going to be dishing out the top, so I don't really need as much hanging out here as I've got in these other places. Now, if I have a center line on my leg, and these are 1.25 inches thick, and half of that is going to be 5/8. I'm setting my adjustable square to 5/8. Now, I'm not real fussy about if I have it or not, because I want to mark from both sides. And that way, if this wood is a little thin or a little thick, it doesn't matter. What I do want is the center. So I got a thicker line there, but I can still line that up with these center lines for my legs. And mark that as the edge of my tenon. And then I can set my gauge to that distance. And again, I like to come in from both sides, and let me darken up the marks from the gauge. Now I can compare that to the actual mortise. In theory, it's a 1/2 inch. It might be a little under. I'm pretty sure it's a little over. I don't really care what the actual number is. I just want a good line to work to, and that's going to give it to me. The nice thing about Forstner bits is they don't seem to be as grabby, at least on the way down. The leg
That's
makes.
our little leg measure.
This line is the bottom of the top. Made that one. So where those two meet is going to be that point there.
That's the inside on the bottom, inside mortise on the bottom.
Yeah.
We need-
I've determined how far down I want to come, and I've carried that line all the way around. And I got the thickness marked out. So I've determined that. And then the next mark is where that hits on the circle. So with my bevel gauge, I'll just connect those lines. And now this is the line that I want to cut to. So I want to remove that part. Get that aimed the right way. And so it's the same as the end of the leg.
So that it'll make that line vertical when the leg stands up at its right angle.
No. This line will be horizontal. This line is at the 15-degree angle to match the mortise that's going through the seat. So this is a sloppy version of what it's going to look like, but it all holds itself together. So again, cutting these, I'll probably cut the shoulder with the back saw and then make that cut at the bandsaw. So I'm just going to cut these shoulders first. And we're in the so I want to cut that side, come back, cut this side. I also have to make a cut this way, but I'm going to wait till after I bandsaw the cheeks. Okay, so I've got the fence set to just about the width. Now with the fence, I got to be careful that I stop before I go into that back shoulder. And I just tried to match up this cut to that cut. And pop those off with a chisel. And then I'll make the angled cut here. And I can use the shoulder that I cut before as a guide to get me down there. And then I still have to cut on that. And I'll just eyeball that. Run back to the bandsaw. So this flat part of the tenon is actually acting as a guide for the chisel to pare that off. So now I can see how close I am to fitting in the mortise in the seat. And I did number these so that I'm fitting a specific tenon to a specific mortise. And that is too wide. So I'll just take that width down. A lot of times with this, if you've cut it on the bandsaw, using the saw marks will show you if you're taking it off evenly, and that'll give you something to aim for. So now I'll check that thickness again, and I've got it fitting in that end. See how it does from the top. And I can try this all the way through. Now I've hit a stopping point, so I'll turn it over and I'll see just what's holding up in the way. So I can, a little more cleaning up on this, and I'll fix that where it blew out.
Mine's bigger.
Okay, and so we made this mark up from the bottom, which is the bottom of the mortise. And this went up, which is the top of the mortise, okay? So in theory, those lines I drew should be hitting on there, on those arcs, and they're not. So I've been spending the last 20 minutes going, what have I done? So, and this is crucial because this is how far out from the center the tenon comes on this guy. Kind of an important distance to have. What I told you to do was get the angled line for the leg, come up 6 7/8, that's the bottom of the stretcher. Come up another inch, that's the top of the stretcher. Now we need to set the compass at that distance to get these locations so we can put them on the stretchers. The mistake I made was I came from the center of the circle over to this mark. That got us that arc. Over to this one. That got that one. Good idea, but I don't want to come from the center of the circle. I want to come from my center line at a right angle. And set that distance. Come back to the center of the circle. Get an arc there. Back to the center line. Set that distance. Come back to the center of the circle. Get that distance. So now these ought to give me the top of the mortise and the bottom of the mortise. So that's a huge difference. It's one of the reasons I've got this thing I can check before I go cutting the compound angled tenons. So what we need to do is, on the layout, erase the screwed up arcs. Hey, everybody, look over there. Well, yeah, and it's
Well, anybody who's seen this in the blog knows that this didn't exactly go smoothly when it was.
happens every damn time, every darn time.
What was that other word you used?
Yeah.
I'm more likely to say that.
Well, yeah, I recall.
Yeah, Megan taught me.
At the beginning, the intro
Those
of
two
it.
previous lines looked like they were just too far apart.
They were too far apart.
Someone, I think.
Absolutely.
Specified in the, it's gonna have to get leaked out.
And so this is one of the cool things about this project. There are so many opportunities for growth. So now what I can do, and this is the whole action here, is if I get this where the points of the triangle are on the circle down in there. I don't know, does that show up on camera? And then I can set this guy on top. And what I'm trying to do is determine the angle where the tenon is going to meet the leg. So I've drawn a center line on the stretcher and a center line on the inside of the leg, and I just line those up. And then I can set my bevel to that angle. Now, it may not be identical all the way around. If it isn't, we may need to wiggle the legs a little bit, shift things around, make sure this is squeezed together. We will be able to wedge things together if it's off a little bit, but we got to come pretty close. Now, once I have this centered and these layout arcs correct, this angle, which is the same angle as the inside of the leg, should be able to connect those. And I want to do that on each side of this piece from the properly drawn arcs. And then if I connect those with my bevel, these lines will connect, we hope. And these new arcs are coming straight down, that's where the tenons are going to be. And this is where we have to make the leap of faith and go ahead and cut them. Now, the tenons have to be a 1/2 inch thick, and from the center here, I need to come out at a right angle to the angled line I just drew to get me through the leg. So my tenon is now a 1/4 inch off each side of those. And I barely have room on the one side if I can get that. To get that connected. So this is going to be my tenon, and from this point it's a piece of cake. All we got to do is cut the lines. What the heck, that's no big deal. So what you're doing here is really,
Center line to center line to center
yeah,
line.
and that's only getting you this angle
Gotcha.
for the top of your tenon.
But okay, hopefully I've got this centered.
And then when you have this centered, that will give you these marks for the top and the bottom of your tenon.
So there's no benefit in trying to make sure that this is setting on top of there at the
No,
right.
that doesn't really matter
Okay.
at this point.
Excellent.
We should have several people close to that.
So we do mortises first.
Yeah, that puts this off another 45 minutes or so. And
Okay. Now, this is set up.
so that should line up with your center line. I would go ahead and mark the edges of the mortises first.
Yep.
And then basically drill one end, drill the other end, drill out the middle. This bit's a little quicker than the Forstner bit.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
why don't you go ahead and get one marked and we'll... Intersection
Right.
is going to be your bottom. And then the inner one will be the top. And the other thing I did, which I would recommend, is mark these pieces. This is the top. This is going with leg 1. This is going leg 2. This is going leg 3. And that'll get you that. This one, you'll be able to cut and see where to stop. This one, if you're cutting from this side,
Oh, okay, yeah, because I would have to judge or transfer that line up.
yeah. One of the interesting things about this project is one of the most time-consuming parts is working up the courage to cut this tenon. So, yeah, and because let's face it, it's weird. And I've got them all marked out on the bottom as well as the top. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a shoulder by hand, the other shoulder by hand, then I'm going to go over to the bandsaw and cut the cheeks. So I do need this to be longer than the tenon will be, but not this long, because shoving this whole thing through the leg doesn't make any sense. I do want to make sure I'm going to have enough length, so I've just come out past where the tenon is, and if I can find a pencil, I'll come like another 1/4 inch past that, and I can just lop that off. Now, Megan suggested yesterday that we talk a little bit about sawing and the basics of sawing, and I didn't make this up. You probably heard it before, but let the saw do the work. And by that I mean, I really want to hold this thing loosely. I don't want to get a depth grip on it. And it doesn't matter if it's Japanese saw like this or a Western saw. I want to really be relaxed when I'm hanging on to it. Japanese saws, there's some disagreement as to whether your finger should be out or not. With a Western saw, it should. Like that. And this kind of helps you to aim. It keeps your grip relaxed. So what I'm going to try to do is aim at the saw this way, looking at the angled line, and just very gently try to get my cut established. And often that's the hardest part, is getting the kerf going. And then once I have it, it's not that much trouble to keep it going on track. And Ray and I were talking about this, and one of the problems is you get started and it starts feeling good and you keep going and you've cut too far. So I'm coming over the other side, and this is why I have it marked back here, really just so I can see when to stop. And again, a light touch to get it started. This would have been a good point to knife in a line. That's right, yeah, push this one. And a good explanation of getting it started is you don't need to be pushing down. You're really just moving it across. If you can try to imagine moving it across without scratching up the wood, that's about the right amount of pressure to have. So there I go, I've got those two cuts. Now I'm going to go over to the bandsaw and cut the cheeks. I do want to orient it so that I'm cutting to the bottom line. That'll leave me a little bit of junk to lop off. And this isn't the kind of thing that you can force happening. You kind of have to just watch it happen. Now that isn't the most beautiful of cuts, but it's all outside my line, so that's good in my book. If I lose my line, I lose my reference. So even if I'm raggedy, it's okay if I'm outside. So back over here again. Huh?
I was talking about doing that side cut by hand. That's actually pretty difficult. Normally I would say, yeah, do it by hand, but that's difficult in that situation.
to,
On the side there, starting your cut on the slope, on the side.
oh, this?
It would be difficult to do by hand.
That's why I used a bandsaw.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I mean, it's not impossible, but it's,
It takes some skill.
yeah, and it's also because this is running off the edge.
Right.
It's a tough cut to start by hand. So,
That's what I was saying.
yeah.
You can edit that out.
She's always arguing with me like that, and then when she agrees with me, I just get so confused. Yeah. Anyway, I can pop that off, and really, even though I'm now working at a compound angle, it's the same thing I was doing the other day. I've got the flat surface to rest the chisel on to use as my guide, so I can pare the high spots off with a chisel. I think the issue of using a chisel for this is getting the cut started, because it's really back here where I want to start, and that's why I like a float. But the task is the same, it's just the lines are now in different positions. And let me, so what I'm looking at is trying to get back to where my lines are. I'm relatively confident that those are in the right place. And if I can get the lumps out of this, see, the float's easier because, again, I've got a reference to establish, and then I just push the thing. So now I can see if that'll fit in the leg. So I've got it started. That's a good thing. I can look from the outside, and I can look down in there and see where is it getting stuck, what kind of junk have I left in there. And now I'll do a little more cleanup on the mortise, a little work on the tenon, till I get that thing to slide all the way home. And it won't be until I can get it all the way through that I'll really be able to judge how good these shoulder cuts are. And one, yes, everything about this is loose fitting. Because when these go together, we need a little bit of play up and down. I had it in the right way, there we go. Like that, to get the seat on and the stretchers all together. So this will take a little bit, but we will get there. This is also a real good point where it's easy to confuse the parts. And it takes a little while. So I've got it in. I actually have a decent fit at the shoulder. I'm going to stop at this point. I'm going to get one stretcher fit to each leg. Then I'll try again getting all three. So, is that clear as mud? Well, get busy. your legs fit into the seat?
I just put all of this together for the first time that far. I haven't gotten that far yet. I'm gonna find out here in a minute, after you talk.
Yeah, because what,
I just need a really, really big sledgehammer. It'll all go together, I promise.
because what we've done so far is we've had the 3 stretchers together, and we've had the legs into the seat, so we should be able to get the whole thing together. Now, it's always an issue, how tight should these things fit? And most of the time with mortise and tenons, the advice given is to put it in by hand and be able to pick it up. I'm a little bit looser than that. So, you know, take the bus until I get off and then get off 2 steps sooner. One of these is a better example. I've also taken my angled tenons and I got those to fit into the legs. So in theory, this should all go together now. And so we'll see if it will really work. So what I do is get the right end. Get my stretchers together. And again, these are relatively loose so that I'm able to get all 3 at once. And now I'll find the right tenon to leg. So number 2 to number 2. That probably would look better. And then get the 3rd one on. Now this is either going to be a sweet moment of victory or an awful moment of truth. I know that the seat has fit on the legs before, and if I get them where the numbers are right, if I can get them started, and you'll see that these joints are acting on these other joints. That's going to be a good thing when the whole thing goes together. So now we've got it, and it's just like this other one. Once it's together, everything's working in concert. It's a pretty sturdy structure. So a couple of you guys are here. You're here except for bang the seat on. It's probably a good idea to go around and look at all the joints. You want the shoulders flat if you can. You also want to keep in mind that as we wedge this together, our assembly method is going to tighten things up quite a bit. And especially if we come up with these, that'll force these joints tighter. So it's kind of interesting how tapping, putting a wedge in here can tighten things up here. Same thing with the seat. If we wedge from the back of the legs, that moves the legs in and also tightens that up. From here, where do we go? We've got mostly cosmetic tasks from here. We want to make the seat round, and so we've already got the center mark, and it's just the radius. Which camera sees it better, that one? Just the radius out close to the edge. Now I just cut these on the bandsaw and then smooth the edges out, round them over. We'll also, we can dish the seat out a little bit. We don't have to go very deep. Again, we have a couple of ways we can do that. And so it kind of depends on your preferences and the tools you have. And then the other thing to do is tapering of the legs. And these are wider at the bottom than they are at the top. And we also can lose some of the width at the bottom if we want to. And a lot of this is appearance. The legs also taper this way. So from the bottom to the top, it's about 3/8 of an inch in the taper. And then it's about 1/8 or 3/16 from each side. We'll get to that in a little bit, but basically it's just marking a line. I cut it at the bandsaw, then smooth the edges out. So that's kind of where we are and where we're going from here. Okay, so laying out the tapers on the legs, from the top shoulder, if I just measure in 3/8 of an inch, make a mark and then draw a line from that mark down to the bottom of the leg, then I can make this cut at the bandsaw. After I've done with that, I'll want to come back and measure in from each edge, and I'm going to come in about 1/8 and 1/8 from the other edge. And this doesn't have to be precisely these numbers. Whatever pleases your eye will work. And now I can draw a line. Maybe I can draw a line. I can draw a line good Lord. Cut. No, I got it. I can draw a line from the bottom to the top. Get one the other way. And then I can just cut these tapers at the bandsaw. Now I really need to do 2 steps because once I cut one way, I'm going to lose my layout marks for the other way. Okay, so after I made the first cut, I remarked the tapers side to side, and now I'll just cut those. And this is a little hard to see to get started. And when I get down towards the end, I hit a point where the blade wants to run out of the thickness. And I'll just let it go at that, and I'll take that down with my plane or on the joiner. That was fun. Yeah, so I can accomplish the same thing at the joiner that I did with the hand plane. Really, all I want to do is make this surface flat. And I'm waiting for the sound. Lets me know I've made a complete cut. That's got it. Got my block plane set with the mouth pretty wide open and the blade kind of angled, so I can take a rough cut on this end and a finer cut on the other. So I want this chamfer to be wider at the bottom than it is up at the top. And I can do that pretty easily just by getting it started down here, and then with each stroke, I'm going a couple inches further. And I'm holding the plane off to one side, so I'm taking a deeper cut, and then as I get closer, I shift it up, and I got more of a finishing cut. Oh, rake across. Need me to do anything? And if I had a mind to turn those into roundovers, I can just chamfer the chamfer until it becomes a curved surface.
So we should order some bandsaw wood.
Anyway, I've got it mounted on the lathe. There's basically two tasks. I want to make it a good circle with clean edges this way, and then I'm going to round them over a little bit. Then I'll change the tool rest around and put a slight dish in the middle of it. So that's what I want to accomplish going that way. And so this is not a fabulous turning project. What I want to make sure of is that I'm being gentle with taking my cuts. Because when I get to the mortises, it's probably going to rattle a little bit. And if I had a straight edge, hunk of wood would do. Really just want to see what kind of a dip I've got in there. I'll go a little bit deeper than that. And that's about as far as I'm going to go, just
I just, yes. I just think,
trying to make it a little easier on the bottom
I was set here.
when it's assembled. Yeah, what I have to worry about is, as I'm coming out, when I get to where the mortises are, if I'm pushing too hard this way, it is possible to jam that in. And this is why I'm taking real light baby kind of cuts. I can see where those are when I turn it on. See that darker circle in there? That's where the mortises are. And as I cut, it gets easier to cut at that point. So I'm really just very gently trying to sneak up on that area. And I'm not taking much of a cut at all through there and out to the edge, which I don't want to be doing anyway. And if I were smarter, I'd be wearing a face shield and a dust mask and one of those cool turner's aprons with the turtleneck. And I'm still going to have to sand and trim the tops of the tenons coming through. I also don't really need to dish out the seat. A flat seat works just as well. And there's other ways I can do this. I can carve it out and do it with chair maker's tools, whatever way I want to do it. There's other ways to smooth the edges of the seat, and so I can take just from the bandsaw. What I really want to do is just get the saw marks out and make it look round. It doesn't have to be perfectly round. As long as there aren't big waves and humps in it, I'll be okay. So, and this is also a way to get good at cutting them on the bandsaw, is to do this kind of work a few times. So you won't know how good a job you did sawing till you get over here. And so really I can cut it, or I can use a more abrasive method. And cutting it, I can use a block plane and just roll it around the edge. And I do need to pay attention to the grain direction a little bit. I want to be going downhill on the curve and also be watching where the grain is. So I may have to shift around, go the other way. And as I don't know how good you can see this from overhead, you'll see those saw marks start to disappear. And that's letting me know that I'm getting closer to where I want to be. The block plane is jumping a little bit. It's still leaving a rougher surface. I could reset the plane to make a finer cut after an initial rough cut. A spoke shave will basically do the same task. And again, it's coming off the high spots, cutting off the high spots. And then once I've got this curve pretty well, I can start beveling the edges and then turn those bevels into curves. I could also read Glenn Huey's mind and say, or you could get a router with a roundover bit and zip it around that. And that's also an alternative for putting the edges on, putting the curves on the edges. The other way that works just about as quickly is with rasps. So what I've got here are 3 rasps, all the same type, but they're getting progressively finer. So with the coarsest one, I'm really just laying it on the flat surface and pushing it around. And it's the same deal. I'm looking for the saw marks to disappear. When they're gone and I'm seeing just the rasp marks, I'll move up to the next finer grit, come around with that, and when the first bunch of marks are gone, replaced by the marks from this tool, I'll go to the finer one, and I can get pretty close to finishing it off that way. All of the surfaces of the legs and the stretchers and the seat, you want to get as close to being finished as you can before you glue it up. So if there's sanding to do, I can take the legs apart, sand the legs. I usually go to like 1 step less than I would hand sand to. The stretchers are a little trickier because I don't want to do the whole inside edge, because that'll leave a divot where the joint is. But I can do the whole outside edge, I can do all the flat surfaces. I don't go too crazy about the top surfaces because as it gets glued together, if this shifts up or down a little bit, I'm going to need to come in and flatten those surfaces out. But I want to minimize the work that I have to do once it's glued together. So, I'm going to glue together the other one. And it will take me a moment to get ready for that. Is everybody hip to cutting the wedges or not? I don't think we really showed that.
No, we haven't really talked about that.
Well, we filmed it, so when the DVD comes out,
That'll sit around in the living room until February, huh?
now what we're doing, you remember these little narrow blocks that Megan gave too many of to the first 3 guys and none of to the last 8 guys.
You didn't tell me what to do, and I always.
I know it's my fault. Anyway, I want a piece 3/8 thick and a piece a 1/2 inch thick, and I usually mill a much bigger piece just to make it easier to handle. And so from that thin piece, I want to slice about 1 inch, 1.25 inches long. Over at the bandsaw, I'm just tilting the miter gauge about 2 or 3 degrees. To cut the wedges, we just take the miter gauge for the bandsaw, and it's tilted 2 or 3 degrees. That really doesn't matter. So then I can use this, cut the wedges. I'm going to make a cut, flip the piece over, and just keep going until it gets too close for comfort with my hand and the blade. I also need to do a little bit of work because when they come off the bandsaw, it tends to leave a little extra. So I just need to shave that little guy off. Now I also want kind of varying degrees of pointiness on the ends, depending on how big of holes I have to fill over here. So this will take a minute. If we had a volunteer from the audience to take over this, I could get the other stuff ready, and we might get home by midnight. Okay, I'm going to glue this old ratty one together that's been kicking around for years.
No. I
Yeah?
don't think it's ready.
Okay.
I think it's
But it has been kicking around for years.
sit for another 4 years.
What I'm trying to do is, as I take it apart, orient things the way they're going to be when it goes back together. This may get a little hectic. The glue I use, I want to be careful in that selection because I want something with a long open time. I don't want something that's going to set up real fast, just on the off chance that things don't go as smoothly as they might. So what I'm going to do is try to get glue on end grain surfaces inside the mortises, put the stretchers together, put the legs on the stretchers, put the seat on the top, and then I'll start wedging it in. So I think I put it off as long as I possibly can. And this may get a little messy. If you're more concerned than I am about the surface quality of your bench, you might want to put something down. And the reason I'm doing this is a lot of people will tell you that the glue doesn't stick to end grain very well, so don't bother gluing the end grain. My theory, which actually isn't a theory, it's proven scientific fact, is the glue wicks down into the end grain. So it'll still hold, but you need to put a little extra glue there so that the next time around, that's given the glue enough time to soak in and it will stick a little bit better. So that's the reason I'm taking this extra step. It also would have been smart to have a damp rag standing by. Yeah, I'm not nervous enough. Let's turn the heat up and really get me sweating. If somebody could find a rag and get it wet and have it handy. So here, I'm going to just get glue around as best I can, as quick as I can. At this point, the glue actually becomes kind of a lubricant. And will make it a little bit easier to slide things together. So I've got those in. Thank you. I'm curious as to how long this really takes. Did anybody look at the clock when we started?
3 minutes so far.
Really? Wow, that's impressive.
Just feels like a lot longer.
Yeah, I'd advise you not to have a dozen people watching you. But even so, by this point in the process, you should have had it together and taken it apart enough times to know that the inside goes in. Okay. And I'll get a little more glue in these guys. And I should be able to get the seat, just pop it right on there. Okay. So it is together, but it's still wobbly and gappy. So I need to get the wedges in to keep things together. I start at the furthest in point, which is in here, and get a wedge in. I'm looking at the outside edges, trying to wedge it in. And yeah, if you could slice the little stubby things off of those, yeah. And so I'm wedging them this way. That's tightening up that center assembly pretty good for now. I'm going to do the legs, and with the legs, I'm starting at the bottom. On this one, I've got a big gaping maw above the mortise. And everybody except Megan will have to look up maw. Huh? Maw, yeah. No, 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 I'm making fun of them. I also want to get a little glue on the wedges. I think I forgot one. So at this point, I'm just trying to keep it even. Oh, is that my phone beeping? I must have missed the announcement about turning your phones on. So I'll work my way around, and if I have a hole that is too big for one wedge, I will stick two in. So I'm trying to stay even with the whole thing. Where this gets interesting is gaps in one place can be closed up by driving wedges in other places. And that is too big to fit. Now, when this is all done, after the glue dries, we'll just take a flush cut saw, trim all these, everything that sticks out off. And I'm getting pretty tight most places that I want to be. If these gaps, I can usually close up by getting something in at the top of the leg. That one is so bad it's not ever going to really close. So we'll just turn it around and get a better looking one at the camera and edit that out. That is pretty much it, you know, and it gets a lot more solid. Once I've got it structurally together, I'm liable to have holes in places like this. And I'll put some wedges in there just to fill the holes. And I don't really have to beat on it all that tightly. These will go in and stop when they bottom out. Now, I said at the beginning this was a cure for perfectionism. It is also a cure, or at least treatment, for fussy glue-up people. You know, because you really can't do this without getting glue all over the place. And that's where the damp rag comes in. If I have holes there to fill, again, I can just drive wedges in. It's end grain. It should look okay when all is said and done and everything is trimmed off. So I'll just take a few minutes filling up holes, and that will be that. So what's kind of neat about this is you don't really need anything special to put it together. There's no special clamps involved. It's the wedging action is holding it all together. Most of the things that were embarrassing to look at earlier are going to get a wedge driven in, and that'll get trimmed off, and it'll be looking good. Now, before that, it was all loose and floppy. And now let's try that again. Everybody, 1, 2, 3. Ooh, ah. I'm gonna have to work on that. Next time we have to hire an audience coach. Once it's assembled, I'll let the glue dry at least overnight, trim everything off flush, give it a final sanding, and then I'm ready to finish it. And any finish is good.